Mr. President, I rise today to make a simple request of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. When it comes to the tax legislation that Republican colleagues are rushing through Congress, please stop, slow down, and let's start over together. We need real tax reform with clear policy goals that will make our nation more competitive, not a partisan attempt to pass something, anything, that can get 51 Republican votes here in the Senate. Our shared policy goals should be making the tax code fair, simpler, and fiscally responsible. If we can achieve these goals, that would be real tax reform. If we work together, we could take long overdue steps and build a tax code that lets working families in Michigan and across the country keep more of their hard-earned money, levels the playing field for our small businesses, and keeps good jobs here, home in the United States. Fair, simpler, responsible. Those are three key points making a tax code that works. Mr. President, if we don't start over, I'm afraid that the current tax legislation will fail on all three accounts. First, this tax legislation is not fair. It dramatically moves towards benefiting the wealthiest people in this nation, with only a little sliver of benefits going to working-class families. The Republican tax bill was clearly written to cut rates for CEOs and large corporations and treats the middle class like an afterthought. I would argue that working Americans who are struggling with stagnant wages while the cost of prescription drugs, college, and housing continues to rise need tax cuts that are built around them. Instead, we're looking at a Republican tax plan that repeals the alternative minimum tax, a fail-safe designed specifically to make sure that wealthy Americans cannot deduct their way to paying nothing in taxes. From what little we have seen of President Trump's tax returns, we know that the AMT, the alternative minimum tax, is the only reason he paid income taxes at all. The Republican bill will eliminate the AMT, and President Trump and folks like him will receive a huge windfall and may not have to pay any taxes at all. Zero. Wall Street loves this bill too, because hedge funds will continue to be taxed at lower rates than small businesses in our local communities. This means many hedge fund managers making millions of dollars will have a lower tax rate than an office assistant working at their firm. Simply put, this proposal fails on the test of making the tax code fair. I also believe this effort fails on the test of making the code simpler. For small business owners back in Michigan, they want to spend their time doing what they know best, which is running their business, not spending days or weeks trying to figure out the taxes that they owe. But as many of my colleagues in the Finance Committee have pointed out throughout this week, the provisions for a small business pass-through only serves to make a complicated tax code even more complicated. Yes, even more complicated. Expert analysis says that the pass-through provisions will require years of rulemakings and thousands of pages of additional rules and regulations. As a small business owner, unless your hobby is studying the Internal Revenue Code, this bill is going to make your life a whole lot more difficult. And finally, on the last test, the test of whether or not this bill is responsible, well, this proposal fails miserably. Writing responsible tax legislation means making hard choices, closing loopholes, and balancing out the pros and cons of every action. Congress has a responsibility to take seriously the threat of a growing national debt, and we have to think about this when changing our tax code. But instead of working to reduce our debt that we're passing on to our children and grandchildren, this proposal actually adds more than $1 trillion to our deficit. And it would be even more expensive, but in a haphazard attempt to limit the cost, the majority has put forward a bill where hundreds of millions of dollars of provisions that middle-class families could use to reduce their taxes, well, they expire, and they expire at random times over the next few years. So when you add it all up and factor in the added additional interest cost to carry this new debt, you have a proposal that adds over $2 trillion to the federal debt, according to the Nonpartisan Center for Responsible Federal Budget. It is widely irresponsible to pile on this debt to finance a tax break for the wealthiest people in this country. But it doesn't have to be that way. Tax reform can be bipartisan. The goal of tax reform must be fair, simpler, and responsible. This isn't just idealism or wishful thinking. We've seen it happen before. When Ronald Reagan worked with Congress to pass tax reform in 1986, the bill received 97 votes in the United States Senate. Yes, 97 votes. That is the sort of bipartisan approach we need, and we need to start working on that now. Michiganders and all Americans deserve a tax code that is fair, simpler, and more responsible, not more multinational corporate giveaways and more debt. I won't stop fighting for hardworking American families and small businesses who deserve to see more take-home pay, and I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join me. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.